welcome Travis Bacon to Home is Where the Darkest Man. Thank you so much for coming by, checking out the studio. Been checking out your work, for the past year or so, and I want to talk about first. Just want to get into your personal project, Contra Cult. Is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your prime purpose and message with this project?
I've been doing the project for, I guess, about 6 years now. We were writing and kind of formulating it for about a year before we put anything out. Actually, for almost like a year and a half before we did. But that's when we started it. We have a slogan called "Keep Goth Hard," and I think like my personal message to that, I think that can get construed as like a music term for hard.
Yeah.
But it's more so, I think that when the goth genre or the goth aesthetic and everything was developed, I think it was just had a little bit more merit and shock value and maybe carried some more weight given like what the environment was like then. And I think I really wanted to take that concept but kind of redevelop it and give it some new textures and sonic energy and just envelop more of the darkness and weight behind it. And I think that's kind of where we stand with that. And I think like the idea of like a contra cult is like to contradict, to be different, to challenge, to not just kind of re-envelop this sound that obviously we have lots of influences from various eras and everything, but I think there's a lot of music that's just like carbon copies of certain decades, and that was really not what we wanted to do. And we wanted to bring like more songwriting elements to it and just more pop aesthetics while also being or trying to be like the heaviest band that we could be.
Yeah, that totally comes across. For me, like when I first heard it, I was like, yeah, everything you just said, it comes across very, very well. And I saw you did I'm sorry if this is the correct name of it, the Process tapes,
Mm-hmm.
when you did that with Vicente, a mutual friend of ours. So how was that? Like I was checking out those posts on your Instagram, and it looks very like intense. So how was the video process for that?
Yeah. We had done a lot of just kind of more standard music videos, and right before that time, we had gone through a little bit of a lineup change. We had a member leave, and I think we just kind of came back together and tried to decide where to go forward with this. And in doing so, and wanting to do a lot of things different, I was really inspired by the Nine Inch Nails Broken Tapes and that sort of idea, and kind of something like a little bit larger than just a standard music video idea, and something that could also like feature a live set and something more of like a live stream kind of thing to show really what we're like live as opposed to just another lip syncing video. And when we started, initially it was just going to be the live footage, and then it was actually Vicente who said that we should put in some skits and things to tie it together. And the last song on the record's called Dissolve, and it's like it has more of an existential meaning to it, but it's about a person like disposing of a body. And then like the bigger message to that is about letting go and moving on and reaffirmation. And so yeah, it just seems suitable to kind of like put those skits and that like process there.
Totally.
Of what that was, from like the initial setting up the station to dismemberments and then to eventually dissolving in hydrochloric acid.
Yeah, I noticed too, like you have /tag cinema.
Mm-hmm.
So you're obviously very into horror. You're very into heavy music. Do you try to merge those intentionally, or does it sometimes, like I notice this happens with myself because I love horror movies and just horror genre in general, and I don't write music intentionally to merge them, but sometimes it like seeps into my writing. So is that something that you do intentionally, or do you like to keep them separate? Or
I think more so now because it's because in filmmaking has become just another thing that I do and another big part of my personality. I mean, Contra Cult's always been a pretty cinematic project, and if you look through the videos, even up to that point, like a lot of them do have darker horror-like elements to them, even if they're not just standard blood and gore. But I think more so with this, with this EP, I wanted to channel into that a little bit more, especially just because some of the lyrical content was a little more specifically violent.
So when you go down, like when you sit down to write for Contra Cult, do you approach it differently as if you were sitting down for a score? Because obviously they can be very different processes, but do you you kind of just sit down and you're like, okay, this is going to be for Contra Cult, or this is going to be for a score, or this is going to be for just whatever I'm feeling this day? Or do you kind of just sit down to write and see what happens, and then maybe you apply it to, okay, this would be great for the band, this would be great for, I'll put this aside for a score in the future? Like, how do you go about your writing process?
Normally the intention is there for one or the other, but with a score, it's a collaborative process, and it's more than just making something to make it, unless I'm scoring my own media. But sometimes one will just become the other. Like, I have plenty of rejected cues that became Contra Cult songs, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Even or even like if I find maybe I'll use a textural element or something or some kind of new instrument, or something, some kind of device I threw a contact mic onto and fucked up, and sometimes a piece of that will find its way into one of my songs.
Yeah, man, it's such a crazy process. Just like I found over the years of songwriting, everyone does, everyone can approach songwriting in such a different way, and it's just cool to learn about, the slightest change or the slightest difference in the songwriting process that you might be influenced from another writer, can make such the difference. So I always like to learn about everyone's different processes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So yeah, we were talking about horror. Like I could talk for hours about horror movies and horror scores, but just curious, what are some of your favorite films to take inspiration from, or that you have in the past, aesthetically and sonically?
I mean, I think the original Halloween was, I still hold a big flame to that one, just because visually, aesthetically, and musically, it has so many, it had so many pioneering elements to it, and I still think it's a fantastic film, and I think it's what inspired me to start getting more into horror. As far as some of my favorites after that go, Audition, it's a Japanese film, would be a really big one. And maybe a little more recently, I love this film, Speak No Evil.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, it's a very they're putting out a remake of it now through Blumhouse, but I believe it's a Dutch film, and it's not necessarily sonically what I've done with my scores, but it has a lot of it's an interesting film because it's a slow burn, but there's these really intense music cues just from a family driving to meet another family on vacation. But I love when a film will kind of take some sort of monotonous, family oriented scene and just put this really dissonant music over it to kind of give you some kind of, it's a really powerful way to insinuate that something bad's going to happen.
So do you, I don't know, for me, I've noticed there are certain American films that are great, but I find myself gravitating more towards foreign horror, mm-hmm. When you just mentioned, one of my favorite French films is, it's called High Tension. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah.
It's just the way that it's like you said, a slow burn, and it starts with it just sets up the scenes perfectly. And I love that kind of slow and like from really quiet to like really abrupt and jarring, like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But like, do you feel like what do you think that difference is between like there's certain, like you mentioned audition, like that's when I remember when I first saw that, I was like, dear God, it's just like they do something different. And I think it's like maybe they're not afraid to push boundaries compared to, some of the films made in the States. But
Hmm.
what do you think that difference is?
I mean, I think what you mentioned is part of it. I think there's like a lot of I don't know, and that could be a variety of reasons. I think there's a lot more. I mean, just speaking, like there's a lot more uh, government economic support of the arts in places like France and maybe not as much Japan, but um, so when you're making a horror film in the States, like a lot of filmmakers, not everybody will have it in their head that they're still trying to sell tickets to it.
Right.
And
Right.
I think it kind of pushes them away from crossing certain thresholds and like pushing certain boundaries. Whereas, you have foreign films like High Tension or Martyrs.
Oh, I love that one.
Um,
Fucking love that one.
yeah. And I mean, I think that there's a little, I think the American audience is getting a little more desensitized. I mean, maybe just from living here,
Yeah.
but and I think there's like a little less of that. And it's not as much like, okay, foreign horror is where you see the really fucked up stuff. Like we've brought more of that here, but you still have like, I don't know, you still have kind of some of these like wholesome values that like will take people away from pulling certain moves in film, like killing kids or something.
Right. But there's one film that I've seen pretty much every fucked up horror film, all the really like underground, dark, niche films. But there's a few that have really fucked me up, and one of them was Poughkeepsie tapes.
Oh yeah.
Some of the stuff in there is just too much. But there's all kinds of different films like that. But there's something really fucked up about that one. For scoring, like we were talking about before, like if you're going in to score a film or to like write music for like a short or whatever, do you go into it with a certain mindset? Obviously, like depending on what type of film it is, but do you kind of just let it inspire you based off of the storyline, or do you have like any certain techniques, or do you just kind of see what happens? Like if, I'm going to use this type of instrument on this one, or I'm going to, the director wants this type of sound. Like are there any specific things that you do intentionally, like going into a horror score?
I try to find like acoustic elements to emulate sounds that the film that's like necessary to the film. Like I recently made a short with my company #tag called Keep Coming Back, which we're taking around to festivals right now. And the story, it has like a, I guess, a clown horror subtext to it. And with something like that, I mean, it was my film, so I wanted to do exactly what I wanted to. And like there's definitely like some incorporations of industrial and metal and various other genres that like I don't necessarily get to do as much in some of the other director hired work that I wanted to showcase there. But I felt like going into that score with a lot of these clown based horror films, they don't use many clown sounds, I find, and there's not usually, like, with the exception of a few, but like generally speaking, like I don't, it's not that often that I actually see like a clown based horror film where there's carnival sounds, or even just, I don't know, sounds of a squeaky toy or something, or like a jaw harp going boing, laughing. So I think specifically with that one, like I wanted to make sure that like some of those elements were there. And I think like music and film is really powerful, where you can use something and use a sample and process it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily know it's exactly that. However, I think, I'd like to think at least that subconsciously that starts to kind of register in somebody's brain as they're watching it, of like, okay, I'm feeling this and I'm feeling there's a sound there. And then I think besides that, like, I do want to, I like themes, and I like things to, I like music that's specific and relevant to certain characters. Like if this, I'll pick some kind of instrument, like my electric water phone or something, for when a certain character comes on screen. It's like, that's that character's sound, or this character's sound, or this character's theme.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all that stuff is just, it's so much fun, especially like when you're used to, say you just finished like an album or an EP or whatever, you're in the music mode. Then when you get to switch over to that, where you're using, like, you get to do your own sound effects, maybe you're doing your own Foley, you get to, it feels like it scratches a different itch. You know what I mean? It's like a different type of puzzle to put together.
Definitely.
So yeah, I love all that stuff too. Just like taking any kind of analog instrument or any kind of like random, I don't know, like say you take a clown horn and you mic it, maybe you run it through like a crunchier preamp, you distort it a little bit, put some effect on it, like make it, doing that kind of stuff, like taking a more known sound but fucking it up a little bit and then adding that into a score or even into music. Like that for me is really fun. It's just to mangle things that you wouldn't really think to mangle, what I mean, sonically. So
and I like to set some kind of like rules or parameters for myself on certain projects too. Like I did a score recently for this film called Carry the Darkness, and it's like a supernatural film that takes place around the Satanic Panic era. So the main characters are like, they're metalheads, and they reference Metallica and stuff a few times, and the whole town thinks they're a bunch of Satanists. And with that score specifically, like I made it a point to only use instruments that you would find in metal bands, and you would find in like your average, like if there was a band in this town, like what instruments do they have available to them? Like probably only, they're not going to have a whole library of Omnisphere plugins or anything. Right. So it's like, how can you do that, and how can you like how can you make these like tension swells and some of these other more tonal textures? I mean, there's a lot of like strum guitar and some more kind of like standard metal parts without sounding like Metallica or something like that. And for that, like I made a lot of pads with like EBOs and feedback and just other fun ways to kind of scrape the strings and mess around with effects pedals and stuff. And I think that's really like what can make scores unique and everything, is if you have the ability to, obviously, because you could work with any director that wants 1,000 genres in their film, but if you can set like a parameters on a template and try not to stray outside of that, I think you can do some really interesting stuff.
Totally. And there's so many, but there's one that specifically just came to mind. You said that Joker with Walking Phoenix, like whole score is just like cello or something, some kind of, and it's so simple yet so eerie and dark. And when you can use that through the whole film, like I love stuff like that too. But yeah, I think some films get a little bit too crazy. There's like so many different sounds, so many different styles of music, so much going on. It's just like jarring, but not in a good way, in a like disorienting way. I guess there's pros and cons to everything we do in music. So for when you're doing a score, what's for you like the greatest thing about it, like the process, and what is not so great to you about it?
I think really seeing a scene change and come to life is great. And I love especially when like, I mean, I try to write everything to picture, but sometimes you just sort of, you can if you're stuck, you can kind of take yourself away from it for a second and write offline, and then bring it to the picture and see how it really works. And then at the same time, I really love emphasizing big hits on big action scenes, and something to kind of like emulate some kind of sound effects and make the, make that department not dependent as much on it, because there's a big, kick sound or
Yeah.
a snare or something, or, some kind of metallic clash, like right on the right spot. I think the difficult part of it is the communication and just the chemistry with your director. And sometimes it just won't, ever work, and that's okay. I mean, and this is not to put down any directors or anything. And I think this is just part of the process, but, generally speaking, whether it be, your filmmaker or more so, like a studio or something, you're talking to people that don't speak in music terminology. So sometimes it's hard to figure that out. Like if somebody says like, make this sound more like The Color Purple, you're like, the fuck does that mean?
Yeah. So
I mean, there's, having that kind of juxtaposition, and it's hard to, when you, it's I've learned to accept this and deal with this more, but it's tough because you can really feel strongly about a cue and feel strongly that it works here, and there's no other way you can think of it or look at it, and you can immediately get the note that it's not right, and that they want more of this or they want more of that, and it's painful to put that into work sometimes, but it's part of it. And as I said before, I think one thing that carries me on with it and makes those blows a little less harsh is when you make other music and you have the option to bring something you really love into something else. And I've had that happen a few times where, if something was rejected and then, I'm hired on like not the same kind of project, but a similar project where I could at least like start a template with this. I mean, I really try to like give each piece of work in my film some kind of unique quality that's reminiscent of what's on the picture. But, sometimes you'll have that opportunity of, I remember that thing I made, maybe it'll work here. And then director number 3 loves it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so common with, especially in, in music too, just like the communication, and a lot of the job is the psychology, just dealing with people. And like you said, someone wants something to sound more like The Color Purple. Okay, that can mean so many different things. And I've even had situations where people describe what they want in colors, but okay, someone 2 years ago said the same thing, but the way they hear purple is different than this person. Like
It's
I've
true.
literally had like people say, "Oh, this feels more orange. Let's make it more orange." And then like I've had a few years later, like someone says something similar, but the way they hear orange is completely different. So every project is, it's like you're starting over with that client, even though you've been doing it for so long. And like maybe most of the time we know what would probably work better for a certain scene or a certain song or a certain whatever, but it's just about having that open communication and patience sometimes. But it's I totally hear you there. It gets very frustrating with just the back and forth, and bringing their vision to life sometimes isn't always as easy as it could be.
You have to be willing and ready to fail, and you have to. And I think you also have to work with people that give you that opportunity too.
Right. And like you said, sometimes it just doesn't work, but people refer us and we're like, this guy would be great for this. So there's like a lot of word of mouth. So hopefully before you go into a new project, both the parties already know what they're getting into in a way. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So you just have to be ready to deal with anything, really.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, it's, I think there's kind of multiple ways that you can be a composer in that industry. You can be somebody that's really known for a sound. And I think generally those are people that are kind of that are known for being an artist outside of this, like One Point Never or Trent Reznor or something. You know, it's like we already have an extensive library of music of what these people do. And then and then there's the composers and people that are much more versatile than that, and are just are hired into like a multitude of genres and different styles and different kinds of films.
Who are some of your favorite composers?
Trent Reznor, definitely Atticus as well. Tyler Bates, One Point Never, definitely a lot of Carpenter stuff. Paul Wiley. Yeah, I generally lean towards the darker knob turners.
Hell yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit here. So
Sure.
you also do live sound, and so you just went out with Ghostmane. How was that experience, and how do you? Obviously, very different like forms of work and music. So, how was that experience for you? Is that something that you love just as much as being in the studio and working on your own music, or is there something different that you like to do? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Currently, Ghostmane's the only artist that I work for in that kind of environment. I was previous to that, like when I lived in New York and before I moved out here, I worked at a lot of venues, and I would toured with a couple different bands, like namely Immolation and Tribulation, and
Hell yeah.
And then a couple other one-offs and things with people, but never really. It was always kind of few and far between. Like I've never really wanted to live the full-on like front of house life. Yeah, I mean, when the Ghostmane opportunity came up, a really close friend of mine produced his last two records. A producer named Arthur Rizek. He's worked with like Power Trip and Ghostmane and Creator and a bunch of other like more metal based projects. Yeah, I've been a really big fan of Ghost's work for a while, and just in my opinion, I think he's just one of the most like prolific artists of our time, and I think he was kind of like it's Gen Z, if you will. It's like answer to like a Manson or a Reznor or something like that. Yeah. And so I was already a big fan, and I remember I hit Arthur up to see if he would be, because Ghost was going on this Grey Day tour, so I hit him up just to see if he would be in LA to try to weasel my way into that show. Yeah. And then he told me that they were actually looking for techs for that tour, and I, once again, like not really something that I go after, but it was right in the middle of the strike, and I'd had a bunch of work fall through and was kind of scrambling a little bit. So he told me that they needed somebody, so I jumped on to do monitors with that show. And I think more so it was, besides the fact that it was just going to be a fun time, and I'd never done a stadium tour before, and it would be cool. I was excited about about getting into that camp, because I really believe in that music and I love it. I love doing that job. I really like mixing monitors even more than like mixing front of house, because I think it's like the closest thing to, they're all on ears, so it's like the closest thing to recording in some ways, right. And I think I'm good at it because I can mix records, and I perform with ears myself, so I know what I want to hear, and I know how to dial that in. But it's been great, and it's been really cool, like getting more involved in that camp, and I've grown close to everybody there, and it's a great environment, and I think they're still making really great stuff.
Right on. Yeah, I think what you said about the mixing monitors, because since you're an artist and you're also, you produce music, So you have that, upper hand to know, like, it's so important, especially like live and in the studio, like for what they're hearing in their headphones, like it makes all the difference. Because if you're not inspired by that, you're more frustrated, you don't perform at your best. Like if you're not hearing everything you need to hear in the way you want to hear it,
Yeah.
like if you're not hearing the right, some vocalists really like their vocals up front with a little bit of effects, and that's how they perform their best. But if they're not getting that from their monitor guy, or the say they don't have their own monitor person, they're relying on the venues people, and you know how that goes. Sometimes it's just not, you can't get what you need.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. It's so important to have the levels right, so you're inspired when you're performing and when you're in the studio as well. So
Definitely.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the band had I think they were all pretty relatively new to ears for that tour, and that just the way that whole show was running, it was, we had 15-minute changeover, no sound check or anything every night. So, and the stage is set up for Suicide Boys, so there's no stage monitors, there's just side fills and everything.
Okay.
They have to do it. And it was nice actually, hearing their satisfaction and hearing them actually start to love using ears on stage, because I love doing it, and I think you can grow to love it. I mean, some people can't, but that's fine. So it's a nice rewarding process that they're enjoying their show.
Yeah, absolutely. And was it a bit of a learning curve, like getting into it? Because I know there's so many different in-ear monitor setups, and certain engineers like specific ways, and I've seen all kinds of rigs and crazy racks of stuff, like the way people like to set it up. So was that fairly comfortable to get into, or was there a bit of a learning curve there, or how was that experience?
I learned a lot more about RF stuff on that tour. I think that was my biggest takeaway. And yeah, because besides all the, I was in charge of syncing all the packs and the RF mics and everything. I learned a lot more about frequencies and workbench and and just how different land masses will affect that and everything. And it's especially in that kind of environment, because you are really dependent on wireless equipment for that kind of show. And you're the opening band, so there's only so many frequencies to go around.
Right.
So that was I think that was my biggest kind of learning curve and exciting thing that's happened through being part of that crew.
What is your main focus moving forward for the rest of the year into the next few years? Do you have a specific, I really want to, my main goal is to push the band as far as possible, or my main goal is to do as many scores as possible, or both, or do you have something that you're more set on, or how do you feel about that?
I think at this point I'm focusing a little bit more on my film career. We had some things fall through with the band this year, and we're still working on new music and kind of reformulating and trying to see what the next thing will be. But I think at this point in my life, I need to go after what really works and hone in on that. So I got a couple projects coming up, that stuff I'm scoring. Just got hired on a series, which I'm really excited about, which I can't talk too much about now. But and then I also, as I mentioned before, I made a film called Keep Coming Back with my horror company /tag, and we submitted it to a bunch of festivals this year, and we want to, with the intention and goal that we're able to showcase what we can do as a company. And we have some other script ideas and some other concepts and everything. So we're traveling around with that to hopefully get some interest from some other investors, or
Nice.
Maybe a studio, depending on where we go with it. I started /tag with my two friends, Kyle Corey and Dylan Smith, a few years ago. And the intention was, we all wanted to do something in the horror genre. Like, I make music and write. Dylan's an art director, and he also writes and wants to direct and produce more. Kyle's a actor and also a writer and director. And I think we both really wanted our hands in the genre in some way. And I think at this point in the world, we're past that era of someone's triumphant story about how they sat outside of some producer or some director's office for hours, and then finally they let them in for 5 minutes to read part of their script, and then said they could shred papers for 25 cents an hour, and they worked their way up. And I think we're just past that as an artistic society. And you have to just go and do the thing and showcase the work. So we started making these really short TikTok and Instagram reels at first with a storyline, with some concepts and some reoccurring characters and everything. And then decided that like this was the way to take it a step further and to go after this festival direction. But we just want to keep making films as the three of us, where we more or less do everything. On this project specifically, I was one of the co-writers. We all wrote it together. I acted in it, which is a newer thing for me. And I did the music and produced it as well. Like, we were able to, with not too much money and a few resources and everything, we were able to really put together an incredible crew and just had a good group of people that believed in us and were able to pull some favors and make it into what it was. So yeah, I'd like to keep doing that just on a broader scale. It's like but the whole sole purpose of it was, I want to score horror movies. I don't have any horror movies that I've already scored to get me the next horror movie job. I guess I got to make them.
Makes total sense, man. And I like the idea that, you're able to, with making these films, you're able to like take all of your creative, outlets and put them into one project. So yeah, you get to direct, you get to write, you get to act, you get to score. So yeah, it sounds awesome. So are you just kind of pitching that and shopping that, or do you have a potential release date, or is that still up in the air for that film?
It's going to depend on the festivals. So, we're going to have to hold out on like putting it on YouTube or making it streamable or anything. And we've also had a few minor conversations about people putting together like anthologies or that sort of thing. And so maybe it'll find a place there. Yeah, but right now it's the submission process. We've actually had some bites and some pretty good luck there already. So nice. It's a part of it's going to be, these festivals work similarly to like a radius clause situation with the band or something like that. And certain festivals want like premiere status, and they want to be the first person to show the film. So we're not sure exactly where it's going to premiere, and we're not sure exactly where the LA premiere is going to be, but it definitely will be at some genre festivals in a few of those short series.
Is there anything you can talk about the film? Like, is it a specific like horror genre, or is it
slasher?
Like slasher? Okay, cool. Right on. Nice, man.
I could say it's a slasher film that takes place in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting.
Okay. Are you sober?
No.
Oh, okay. It's just part of the storyline. Okay.
Yeah. It was just something, I hadn't seen that before.
To switch back to music for a second, like, how do you feel about, I guess this could be just for the entertainment industry in general, but just with like what you touched on earlier, it's a different time. We have the resources and we have the access to just basically anyone can put up music, anyone can put up a movie on YouTube. How do you feel about the Spotify thing? How do you feel about like where the music industry has gone in the last like 10 years because, you know, it's changed so much, and there's just all kinds of, I don't know, just it's very messy. So like, how do you
Yeah.
feel generally about, you know, the Spotify thing, the streaming thing? Like, do you feel that music has hope for the future, or is it just going to get more and more lost and too far gone? Like, how do you feel about that?
I think it's a give and take. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think what you're touched on. There's like we've said, there's pros and cons to everything. I mean, it's not as if the industry was ever good. So, I think when people like really obsess over, you know, it's Spotify, it's this, it's that, and then, you know, they either just don't have the information, or you know, they're just not like they're looking into the past and what, you know, what it meant to be on a label in the 90s or something. And, you know, there's plenty of artists that every member of TLC was broke by the second record. Like, you know, I think I I think I think there's a lot of I agree with the criticisms completely. Like, I think that you know, there's a problem when you know, we're talking about Spotify, and when one streaming service is giving you significantly less than another streaming service, and more people are going to that streaming service. So unfortunately, they're going to be able to like hold that over people's heads. And, you know, until only a few years ago, there was no way to monetize streaming at all. And, you know, when file sharing was first became a thing, that was the biggest like criticism and anger against it. I mean, I think it's definitely, it's harder, and there are a lot of artists that, I don't want to throw shade, but, you know, maybe seep through and have populace based off of an internet presence or something, and maybe it's not necessarily as musical. Whether or not that actually translates to real like music fandom is to be determined. But I also think there's a lot of value and like merit to the fact that like so many artists don't need these large corporate companies to, I mean, besides Spotify, but, you know, don't need these large corporate companies like record labels and everything to maintain and have a career, and they can own their masters and,
Yeah.
you know, and actually, or, you know, have their distribution the way they want it to, and really connect like directly to their fans. And that wasn't really there before. And, you know, before, when like, I mean, you can make the argument that the media is still controlled in some sort of way, and that, you know, algorithmically, like certain things are pushed while other things aren't, and there is a higher power like controlling that. But you know, before, I mean, there literally was a time where you could have a band and just never have the opportunity to record whatsoever, in no light, like no, you know, it was just, that was it. Or it took you 4 or 5 years just to get into a studio, because you had to have a label to get into a studio. There was no way you could afford that.
Right.
So I don't know, it's a give and take, and I think I think that in some way someone's going to have a criticism against it anyway, and there's going to be, and you know, and that's just, we've seen that through history anyway. From, you know, it was a problem when someone figured out how to plug in a guitar into an amplifier and make it make sound. That was
Yeah.
that was not okay. When the phonograph recording came out, that was not okay. When Pro Tools came out, when Auto-Tune came out. So there's always going to be some kind of, I think there's always going to be some kind of criticism against it. And then I also think that like really great art will always filter through in some way, and there'll always be someone doing something kind of new and kind of unique.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're on the precipice right now of like, well, it's already begun, but the whole like AI thing, it's like, that's what people are really resisting. I'm like, I see the threat. I see like why it could be a problem, but that's like you just said. There's always the new thing that people are resisting. So I don't
True.
know. I'm not crazy about like, oh, just sign up for this app and like type in what kind of a song you want and it'll create it, and then you can upload it to Spotify and make money. Like that's, I mean, if people are gonna do it, fine. But like what you just said is like the best art will be able to reach an audience and be seen and heard.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, it's just a very, I don't know, just we're on this in this new era of AI, and I just don't know like what the next thing is going to be, because it was, you know, when I was growing up, it was like cassettes, CDs,
Right.
and then Napster, and then downloads with Apple, and then Spotify, and like now we're in the streaming thing, and like what's next? Is it all going to be like fed to us through AI? Like I don't know. It's so it's kind of part of why I asked you that. I was like, what do you think? What do you think the next thing is going to be for music? What's after Spotify? You know,
It's a good question.
yeah,
I don't
'cause
know.
there's going to be something. So
Yeah. I always think I read this book in high school called The Feed, which is basically about it's kind of like a futuristic dystopian romantic coming of age story about kids that have compute, like the Feed is a computer chip that you can be born with and have installed in your head. So that's just becomes your whole reality, and how you actually use a computer as it's always connected to you, which is not that much different than this. But I don't know how what's going to be the new way of ingesting music. I mean, we already have like AI artists and such. Yeah, I'm not sure.
how do you feel about that though? Like, does that piss you off, or you're like indifferent about it, or don't care? Like, some people are very, very against it, and some people are ignoring it. Like, how do you feel about that? They're like that, you know, an AI artist can be created from nothing and, you know, be super popular. While at the same time, there's like authentic, true, like human beings who are amazing that are struggling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I mean, I think like the fan base of something like that could, you know, it's it's potentially true that like that fan base is interested in something like that just because it is AI, not necessarily because it's music or anything.
Yeah.
And you know, that kind of like gives to the aesthetic of everything. So if it means that like, I don't know, a bunch of video game nerds like this little AI rapper that's some kind of character, I mean, it's gonna happen eventually. It's just a thing. I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it's going to take away from the potential fandom of like these other artists and everything. And, you know, like I said, like I think it also can just be used as a tool like anything else. And, you know, I think, it's I don't know. It's different. It's scary. It's like it can be really scary and be really yeah, threatening, I think, in some lights. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't really let myself obsess about it. I think if I did, I would just it would just turn into like another thing that I can't control, that I'm gonna feel a way about, just to feel about that way about it.
Yeah, I think that's the healthier way to go, is just if you like it, cool. If not, you could ignore it. I think it's just going to be like AI. It's just going to be another genre of music. Like some people are like, oh yeah. Cause like you said, there's some people that like the really, you know, like the really nerdy techie kind of genres. So it's like, there's going to be those people that they want to go see an AI artist, where they go to the show and it's just like screens, or who knows, robots like playing these AI songs. Like there'll be a niche for that, and there'll be people that like that. But I think it's just going to be a genre. I don't necessarily think it's going to replace everything else.
No, I agree. And I think also, like, I think the same way that our brain is starting to get used to AI art, and like it's very clear when you whatever, you see like a record cover or some kind of targeted ad or something, or, you know, it's like it's become something we actually know. And when you see that kind of like painting style of like standard AI art or what have you, or I don't know, some new formulation of somebody's face, it's like we know as a culture and a society that that's AI, and I think that's gonna eventually translate to our ears a little bit more.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
after that, you make your own decision of if it's something you fuck with or not.
Yeah, and I remember when like the album cover reveal for the new Deicide album came out, and people were just freaking out. But then I read another article saying it wasn't AI. It just was like a special. I forgot what artist did it, but people thought it was AI, and they're freaking out, like talking shit. And then it wasn't. And then I was like, well, I picked up that CD actually a couple days ago at Amoeba, and it's actually a really good album. But yeah, it's just funny how like people are just freaking out about it. It's like, if you don't like it, then move on, you know. But
yeah,
there's always gonna be those people.
I mean, I understand the sentiment, I do, and it's hard when you are working so hard on something and then something can just be made on a computer. But
before we wrap it up, I have one question that is like the theme question for the podcast, and feel free to, if you need to take a minute to think about it, if you don't want to answer, that's fine. What was the darkest point in your career so far, and what did you do to overcome it?
Darkest point in my career, I think that was probably right around COVID time. Our band had signed to Roadrunner, actually, like, and that was sort of our development and come up when we had first started. And right before the pandemic was right when we started to like do that rollout, and we had a lot more to start a band with than most people did, because we were like in a development deal with them off of one of our old demos. And we put out our first single, I think it was February of 2020, and then they dropped us March of 2020. I just kept going, just kept writing and kept doing stuff. And, I think that's really all you can do, or you can let it go. I think I realized that, like, the music was more important than like these superficial kind of opportunities. And that had something like the pandemic not happened, who knows where that relationship would have gone.
Yeah.
And we did have all our music and masters back and everything, so it was at least like some kind of clean break. But it was a big letdown, because we had done a lot of work with them. And it's the industry. This industry has a ton of losses, and I think one of those losses is just how your relationships fade away with people that you once worked with, and whether that's based off of like your own kind of resentment towards that loss, or just the fact that it's a business after everything else, and like that person was your friend when they thought you were going to make them a bunch of money.
Right.
So,
right.
I think like coming out of that and, losing those connections and some of those opportunities and everything was really dark and really hard.
Yeah, I feel that, man. I've known quite a few different people as well who have went through the same thing, like being dropped and going through that state of depression. And, but yeah, that's the thing. Like you said, this industry is just all about, you have to be extremely resilient, and you have to be able to accept failure and just let it be. It's just like any other day, and just keep going. And because that's what it takes, man. It's like, it's all these stories of people, their success stories. It's always like, well, it took me 20 years of no's until I got a yes. So it's like, I think one of the strongest things that you can have in this industry is just like perseverance and being able to push through all the dark times, because they're definitely going to be them. So
and it's okay to fall apart a little bit too,
absolutely. We're humans.
Definitely. I think there's this I was talking to my sister about it recently. Like, the entertainment industry is like one of the places where you can just be you can be just abused and shit on, and then simultaneously told like that you're not allowed to react to it or something.
Right,
or you know,
right.
or it's like that's kind of what that's what the title track on our last EP is about. Like, you know, it's all just part of the process. Like, don't like you know, you worked forever on something and then it falls apart, and it's like just part of the process, and it is, but the process sucks.
Well, Travis, thanks for coming by and sharing that.
Thanks
It's
for
been
having
great
me.
to learn more about you and have a chat. So, yeah, man, where can everyone find you if they want to get in touch?
You can find me on Instagram at SVRTC. Yeah,
I'll put the link on there.
CNTRACLT, Savart Contra Cult without the vowels. And then you can find us on Spotify, Contra Cult Collective, and you can find some of my scores under Spotify on Savart Sounds.
Perfect. Right on, man. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. Cheers.
Thank you.